Hey, this is Sports Slaw with Lomas Brown, the pro.
And Deb Schneider, I'm the prof. And together, we're the pro and the prof. And welcome to Sports Law, and I still giggle every time I hear you giggling.
I know, Deb. I'm trying to get used to it myself. I am.
I am too, but this is just so funny. So today we're gonna really delve into high school sports, Michigan high school sports, which is pretty exciting because we get them back again. So we have Mark Uhl from the Michigan High School Athletic Association, Executive Director. You've been with the with MHSAA. I always get that wrong. Since 2004. So you've been there for a long time. Now you've been Executive Director, and you get to run the organization through a global pandemic. And then
this was not in the job description when I moved into the Executive Director chair. That's for sure. So as I told people when I got my master's in sports administration, I should have taken pandemic 101, but we're taking it one day at a time.
Yep. And of course we have Sean Baligian here, who's a 25-year broadcaster, pre and post Lions. You do the Wayne State. You've been our guest before. Yes. And let's just talk about high school sports. We have a 180-degree pivot from 2 weeks ago. We weren't doing high school sports. Now we have Gretchen Whitmer signed Executive Order 176, which now allows organized sports. We played a video of you, Mark, actually a few weeks ago, talking about how upset you were that you had to cancel the sport. What happened? What's changed?
So the Cliff Notes story is, back in late June, that's when the governor with her task force created the roadmap to reopen schools. And what that did was that gave us the responsibility to provide all the guidance documents that we'd use in the fall. So our team spent the entire month of July. We had a board meeting on the 29th of July, and it was full speed ahead with all of our fall sports, including football. So we were excited. We had a great plan in place. And then the next day, Governor Whitmer issued Executive Order 160, which required social distancing at all times. My wife's a high school basketball coach, and, she's kind of laughed that she's coached a few of her teams that would always social distance when they were playing defense. Never got within 6 feet of anybody, but certainly Lomas understands. Hard to be socially distant and play football. So as we got into early August, it was literally hundreds of questions back and forth to the governor's office. They approved our low-risk sports, cross country, tennis, and golf. They said that volleyball and swimming could practice outdoors, but not yet indoors because the gyms and indoor facilities were closed. We got kind of the yellow light with soccer that we couldn't go ahead and play games. And we got in a week of football practice and helmets only, but that came to a halt because of Executive Order 160. So back on August 14th, our board decided to postpone football because the fact of the matter was we had no other choice that day under the law. On that Friday, the following Monday would have been our first day in full pads. And obviously, the law wasn't going to change over the weekend. And so it was the right thing to tell kids and coaches, look, we've got to postpone. The law is what it is. I could write a book on what happened then in the next 3 weeks, all of the back and forth and the twists and the turns. Long story short, 160 gets replaced by 176 last Thursday, which allowed all sports to move forward. It got our young women into the indoor facilities. It allowed soccer to go, and it brought back football. And so as of last Thursday, over the last 8 days, we've been answering literally thousands of questions about what it's going to look like, limitations, all those kinds of things. But I can tell you that there have been some real challenges the last 8 days. Certainly face coverings a part of that, and I'm sure we'll get into it. But you're right. In 20 days, for things to go from football, we're going to try and find a place next spring to play, to it's suddenly back. And ironically, and I'll wrap up this answer on this note, we were looking for different windows to play football in the spring. And I can tell you that the further north you go in Michigan in March and April, the harder that became. So when we got the chance to give the fall another shot for a 6-week regular season, then followed by a tournament, that was far better than we could have gotten, I think, in any window in the spring. And so that's why we're moving, and it's full speed ahead.
Yeah. Mark, you talking about spring for football, but what about the other sports that it would have presented a challenge for by moving them to the fall too?
You're exactly right, Lomas. It would have impacted the end of winter to where those winter athletes wouldn't have been affected. And of course, every returning winter athlete had their season last year. As Sean, talked about before we got on air, that Sean was ready to broadcast our state hockey championships last year when the shutdown happened. So our winter kids got affected at the end of their season. And then, of course, every spring sport lost their entire season. So if football had to have fit into the spring somewhere, it would have affected not just the football kids, but also everybody who's a winter athlete and everybody who's a spring athlete. And, we're all about multi-sport participation and not specializing. And if we would have had to have done that, it would have created all kinds of challenges. And, my colleagues in New Mexico and California, who were the first two to postpone football to later on in the year, well, of course, their weather, they can play football starting in January. Unfortunately, given our climate, that just wasn't an option. So you're right, Lomas. The challenges of football weren't just football related. It was how it would affect both winter and spring too.
Mark, where are we at right now on 9/11, 8:39 at night in regards to the face mask? Because I know so many coaches, so many administrators, so many of athletic directors have really made their case in regards to questioning and what's the science and everything. Are there still ongoing discussions? Where is it right now as we speak?
Good question. So the change in EO 176 last Thursday was we can play football. And that was the headline. And that's what really took everybody's attention through the Labor Day weekend. What most people missed in 176 is that, all sports can go forward, but it has to be done in face coverings for all sports except swimming. So what we have done since then is had all kinds of questions, because the toughest sell for this was actually in cross country. To require a face covering for a kid having to run 3.1 miles as quickly as possible, putting a face covering on that athlete, when, by the way, we went the first 2.5 weeks of the season without them. You want to talk about a challenge. Football, there are some challenges, but you go hard for 5 or 6 seconds and you usually get 30 seconds to rest. So what the governor did on Wednesday is a new order came out, which updated the face covering issue. And what it did was it removed the face covering of 4 sports. So swimmers in the water still get to do it without a mask. Again, I've got a healthy sense of humor, not making light of that. So keep your mask off in the pool. And then the other 3 sports, cross country, thankfully, in golf and tennis. Those kids can all compete without a face covering. The other 3 fall sports, soccer, volleyball, and football, there is the requirement of that face covering. So, Sean, as it stands right now, we've had to make a number of interpretations, especially for football and really for any sport that's played in a helmet, is, okay, what does a face covering look like that's legal? And so certainly the cloth face mask that's on, the gator style or a mask with then the helmet on over it, good to go. We've also, because the national rules making body has made what they call the splash guard, which is the full face visor, not just over the eyes, but it now extends over the whole face mask. Those are also legal. So a young person that's got a full plastic shield on the front of that helmet, that meets the requirement of a face covering. And then, of course, capitalism is alive and well, and many manufacturers over the last 10 days have come up with all kinds of unique cloth and fabric face coverings that attach inside of the helmet to the chin strap. So a lot of options. And as of now, all of those are currently legal. I think the group right currently with the biggest challenge are our soccer players, because that is a game to where there aren't natural breaks or pauses. There aren't any quarters. There aren't any timeouts. So for those soccer kids, we've actually allowed officials before the game to decide, 2 times during each half, we're going to stop the game for a mask break. You can go over, you can get a drink, you can get your mask off, you can adjust things if you have to. So that's just an example of, yes, we have to follow all the EOs, but I think some common sense here has to enter in as well. And I know there's a lot of heartburn about the requirements. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just stating a fact. That is not the MHSAA's policy. What we're doing is working with our schools to make sure that they follow Executive Order 180, which is a state law. And if there are concerns, any changes would come from the governor's office. And if things get tweaked, then it's our job to communicate that to all of our schools. So I can tell you, Sean, that over the last 8 days, it has been the most challenging issue we've dealt with in my almost 20 years with the association, because the mask, it's even taken on a political dimension. We're now wearing a mask or not wearing a mask. And given the presidential election just around the corner, it's amazing how passionate and how big of an issue this has become.
Yeah. And I could tell you just from coaching, because Mark, I coach over at Bloomfield High School, and actually my wife is the cross country coach at East Hills Middle School. So we were just talking about that issue about the mask. Now that the kids don't have to wear the mask, her being able to keep them socially distanced. Are they going to stagger the race out to start the kids? Just different things like that she was talking over to me. And I do have to say, Mark, my goodness, I was out there at practice today coaching with my mask on. I had to take a mask break just from coaching in it, because again, it's hard, especially when you're trying to instruct the kids and you're really passionate about it. It takes your breath away. So, I could see how there was resistance for the kids wanting to wear it, because it does impede their breath. But again, like you say, you have to caution on the side. You have to be on the side of caution. So again, this is something that the kids are just going to have to deal with. And we ordered a lot of those masks that go across the face shield. We ordered that for our team today. But I guess what I wanted to say to you is, how do you guys deal with the have and the have-nots? Meaning, compare my program at Bloomfield with Pontiac. And, and when we were initially supposed to start the season, our first game was going to be against Pontiac. And there was concerns to whether they had the proper tests, had they been doing the proper things during the off season to make sure their kids were safe, or how were they going to test because of budgetary, refinement. So how are you guys going to deal with that as a overall organization? How will the MHSAA deal with that?
And I'd like to add one little piece to that question, because Pontiac is one area, but we also talk about a lot of Michigan school districts are in rural areas and up north. So there's even more of the have and have-nots when you're dealing with some of those high school sports.
So that in both Lomas and Deb, you've hit on one of our real challenges, that when we're making even rules in general, to find a set of rules that fit for our very diverse state, from a large metropolitan area like Detroit to a place like Ironwood, Michigan, that's closer to Minnesota than it is to the lower peninsula of Michigan. When thankfully, as I mentioned earlier, with capitalism alive and well, there's now a number of different products out there that actually are quite affordable. Some of the cloth inserts that go inside of the face mask that do cover the nose and mouth, those actually right now are retailing for only $6 and $7. So it's not a case of a large team would need to go out and you're spending another $30 or $40 or $50 an athlete. That a lot of these helmet attachments that meet the face covering can really be done for less than $10. And so that's been really good news. And we've actually even helped a few of our schools where finances are a real challenge, especially given the budget crunch that everybody's in coming out of COVID here. We've been able to really kind of serve as the point guard, so to speak, to get them connected with the right people to get those coverings cheaply. And I'll also just add, the haves and the have-nots. One of the reasons why we fought so aggressively for school sports to be able to go, all sports, including football, is a lot of our kids, especially our kids in those lower socioeconomic communities, they need sports, because if the school programs were all going to surrender the field to the non-school world, and no criticism of those folks, but you know what, to plan a non-school team, there usually is a pretty good sized check to be written. And we were afraid that if kids didn't have the chance to play for their school, which is very affordable in most cases, if the only option were these expensive travel type programs, Lomas, as you said, we would be pricing some kids out of any kind of activity. And now if I can't afford activity, now what other things am I doing with my spare time? So this was a lot bigger than just being able to play football. Is the last 6 months have been the strangest time, I'm assuming, of all of our lives. You know, the one thread of normalcy that we can give kids right now is at least athletics. My gosh, school during the day is on a computer. It's all online. I don't see my teachers. But the one thing that is still normal is, you know what, for 2 hours a day, I get to head up to school. I get to see my friends, even though we're a little bit further apart than we used to be. But I now get to see coach, and it's about relationships and getting moving again. And so this really is a lot bigger than just individual sports. It was really a mental health piece for our kids too. And there you see on screen, that's what we refer to as the splash guard. So that full visor on the helmet that meets the requirement of that face covering. And I suspect we'll see a lot of those this fall.
Mark, it's interesting. Take me back to that day in March, because as you mentioned, you didn't sign up for this. You know, you've been involved in the game and athletics and academics forever. I'm guessing simultaneously it was the right decision, but probably the hardest decision you've ever had to make to pull the plug. What went through that process back in March?
So really quick. So on that Friday, I'm at Ford Field with our wrestling championships. Ford Field is now the home of our wrestling finals. And we had 2,000 competitors, and we had 20,000 fans, and the place was hopping and everything was great. On Saturday, I jumped on a plane with my son. He had a football recruiting visit at the Air Force Academy. So we're in Colorado Springs on Saturday and Sunday. We fly home that Monday. And if you would have asked me, Sean, how much would you take on a bet if by this coming Thursday, all sports on the globe would come to a stop, and I would have bet you $1 trillion. My point is that it happened to all of us that fast. Yeah. You know, I'm sitting in my office on those days, and somebody would come to my door and say, they just canceled the Big Ten basketball tournament. And 10 minutes later, the NHL just canceled, and then it was the NBA, and then everything stopped, you know, with our hockey finals and basketball. And it wasn't long after that you heard the NCAA basketball tournament wasn't going to happen. And then, you know, the Olympics was going to get postponed, and all those dominoes fell so quickly. It really took almost a month for the dust to settle, just for all of us to kind of get our bearings. I think part of us thought that when we all had to stop and pause, that, well, we'll be back in school in 2 weeks. And then 2 weeks turned into 3 weeks. And there was just all of that uncertainty for everybody. And there's some good Air Force. Ray
is on it tonight, Mark.
Absolutely. But so, Sean, it's still part of, I think back to that month, and I think all of us experienced that as quickly as things were just getting canceled and stopped. And it just took a while to really understand what we were dealing with. And I think to a certain degree, we're still kind of working our way through that here on a day-by-day basis.
Yeah, I want to look at the economics just a little bit, because when we talk about some of these rural communities in particular, and you talk about how important sports are, sometimes these kids, my daughter actually taught up in Northern Michigan, and she was a coach, and the concessions and everything, all the money that you make from the attendance, and it looks like we can't have attendance, we can't have concessions. That's going to be huge for some of these. Well, I would think for pretty much any school, because so many of the sports run on fundraisers at this point.
They do. And so most of our athletic departments are what we refer to as, they're all self-funding. So every dollar that an athletic department makes at the gate with a $5 or $6 ticket is they keep all that money, and then that really runs their operations. for the MHSAA, we're a private not-for-profit. 76% of our revenue in a normal year comes from ticket sales at our tournament events. So we have a pretty lean, mean operation. We have a total of 24 employees. And when folks are able to come back in our building, so every 4 employees that you see in our office, 3 out of those 4 are paid by ticket sales at tournament events. I'll give one last financial example. So we lost the entire spring season last year. All of our spring tournaments, our financial hit for losing the whole spring was only $200,000, which, by the way, isn't all that unique because it's the same for our schools. You ask our schools, what's the lowest season of revenue for athletics? Far and away, it's the spring, not even close. So only $200,000 losing the spring. That was good news financially. Losing the last 2.5 weeks of our winter tournament when we did, which included hockey and both basketball finals, both boys and girls, was a $1.2 million hit. So the whole COVID financial hit for us as an association was about 1.5 million. And so, yes, that's our challenge from a state level, but I think, Deb, every athletic department is dealing with those same things, probably on a little bit of a smaller scale. But yeah, if you can't have paying customers, a lot of times those concession stands are run by the sports boosters, and it's all that money that they generate takes care of all the extra stuff. And in years where budgets become tight, it actually, that booster money is turned into the necessary stuff, not just the extras. So no, certainly finances are a challenge. And for our operation, we're figuring out a way here of how we can keep going with limited revenue and have to be creative.
Yeah. Mark, did you guys, from the standpoint of sanitizing and all that, was that a big undertaking? I mean, now with the equipment, and I'm just talking about football in particular, with the shoulder pads and different things like that. Was that the undertaking? Is that the undertaking of the school, or is that the undertaking of the district?
So it really, Lomas, is going to be the school in most cases. Now, the district's going to have a policy, and a lot of times the districts are just following the guidance that we created. So it was interesting this summer as we put those together. Okay, yeah, we have to clean the equipment after each use. Well, how often should that be? So in football, so every time I take a snap from the center and I throw a pass or make a handoff, do we need to clean the football? Every time a lineman fires out and contacts a blocking sled, do we need to wipe that down? You know, it wasn't humorous at the time, but you know, how do you clean a tennis ball? I mean, seriously, our tennis coaches who have hundreds of these, do we need to clean these after it? So all of those kinds of things, you know, a volleyball that gets touched by different players and how often, and, you know, all of our summer workouts were outdoors. Well, what if a kid needs to use the restroom, you know, and what are the sanitizing requirements behind that? So it literally, this summer, it was every day was almost like a completely new world as you were really coming up with policies for things that forever all of us had just taken for granted. You pick up your ball, you head on out and let's go. And I guess one of another of the COVID lessons.
Mark, how have things been early on? It's almost like it's an election year. You know, it's early results are in. Certainly, we don't know the whole tale, but how have things been so far in regards to testing and keeping kids safe and keeping COVID away?
Overall, we're really pleased with both our summer experience and then as fall sports have begun. I think one thing that helped bring football back when we were able to do it by the change in the executive order is I think one reason our schools were so supportive is they saw a really successful start in all of our other sports. I'm going to lean on our 2 neighbors to the south here and just share a few data points, which I think are incredibly important. We keep daily COVID metrics where we compare our data with those of both Indiana and Ohio. And the reason we picked Indiana and Ohio, those are 2 states that both started all fall sports right around August 1st. So we took our numbers, and by the way, and I agree fully with Governor Whitmer, that we've done a really good job in Michigan because you compare our COVID data, even though we've had a little bit of an uptick this week, we are in a far better position than most other states. So hats off to the governor for getting us in that good position. So what's been interesting, though, is you looked at the COVID data in our 2 southern states on August 1, And then we compared that in 14-day increments because it was important to see where did Indiana and Ohio start out with COVID. And now, after 6 weeks, did their numbers spike or go up? Because one would think that when you start playing football and you've played football now for almost 6 weeks, you would think those numbers would dramatically go up. And the data has shown just the opposite, that their percentage of new cases have actually, in Ohio's case, actually is down over August 1. Positive tests are down in both those states. And the other thing in Indiana, they're now in week 4 of the season tonight. That the number of schools that have been able to play every week in Indiana have been 95% plus. That the number of schools here in week 3 that can't play because of COVID were only 3%. So what it shows is that after the first week or two of contact practices and games, we're not seeing the COVID spread and the COVID spike in our 2 neighbors. And again, I am not a doctor, an epidemiologist, but I don't think there's some magic potion at the state line to where us starting off with better numbers than both those states, following all the safety protocols, we have a great deal of confidence that we're going to be able to do this fall and do it very safely.
So no concern, Mark, with the numbers increasing. That was because that was going to be my next question, because we have seen an uptick even today. It was a big increase today. So no concern going forward.
So there's always concerns, I think, in general, but what's really given us a lot of confidence, and we've really, again, the deep dive in the data have been to our 2 southern neighbors, similar populations, similar school demographics. In all 3 states, we've got a major metropolitan area. In Ohio's case, they've got 2 of those. And then in all 3 of our states, we also have some very rural areas. So there's really a good comparison there. And very encouraged by their data, not just in football and all sports. And by the way, when we get started with games next week, we'll be the 33rd state in the country playing fall football. In all the reports, I'm on a weekly call with my colleagues in other states. To be honest, the issues that there have been in the country have mostly been with volleyball, because I do think there are some very unique challenges with indoor sports right now, even given the contact nature of football. What we're hearing from all over the country is the outdoor nature of tackle football. We're not seeing the increases in the spikes. And like I said earlier, there are some states, believe it or not, they're reaching the midway point of the regular season. So the all data that did not exist a month ago of being able, and then the other thing, and I'll wrap up on this answer, is in COVID, the thing I've realized is nobody wants to be first in anything. Everybody kind of wants to see others go, see what works, see what doesn't, be able to then to have some data to make some tweaks and changes. So yeah, it was a painful 3 weeks while we had to kind of pause on football. But the positive part of that is it did give us an awful lot of metrics from around the country, which we've been pretty good students, if nothing else. And I think this is going to help us have a safe fall season.
And what about the protocols? If somebody does test, how are you handling the testing? Because you've got a lot of data here. So how is the testing being handled, and what happens if someone does test positive?
So that's a little bit of a challenge, Deb, because while all of our county health departments are trying to be on the same page and give a consistent answer, it really is handled by local health department by health department. So if you're in one county to where that chief officer is a little bit more conservative and careful, they may define who a close contact is, and the number of kids that may have to be quarantined could be different than similar circumstances in a neighboring county. And I know our health departments are talking all the time. So really, when a school does have a positive case, their first contact is with their local health department, because there's going to be different challenges in Wayne County than there are in Chippewa County up in the Upper Peninsula. And so that local control and that local guidance is very critical.
Now, great stuff, Mark.
We are running out of time.
I know I've told you this before. I think your leadership and the fact that you've made yourself so accessible is greatly appreciated. Continued success to you, Mark, for sure.
Great to be with all 3 of you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, and the thing I like to say, Mark, I seen we ran the clip when you announced it, and just your raw emotions, man. That moved me, because you don't see most administrators get like that. And I know you say it was hard going upstairs to tell your son that you were having to do that, but I'm just saying personally that was moving to see how it moved you to your emotions to have to cancel the season. So I'm really glad that we're able to come back, man. And hopefully the thing we want to do is be able to keep this thing going throughout the whole season and finish.
Amen. And as we see here, a face made for radio.
Any closing thoughts, anyone?
If I could just say, just encouraging all the watchers and listeners, just keep doing the right things. If we want our kids to be able to play, we all need to buy in and do the right things. And let's protect the season for our kids.
Well said.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank everybody for coming to Sports Law. Check us out on sportslaw.com. Check us out on Facebook, on SoundCloud. And thank you so much, Mark, for your insight into all of this. And Sean, for your wonderful questions. And Lomas, of course, as always. It's just great to be here with everybody. So thank you again. And here's to a great 2020 season.
Absolutely.
Amen.